or imprisoned, and if a free person of color shall be fined, imprisoned, or whipped at the discretion of the court, not exceeding 39 lashes, nor less than 20 lashes.
Be it further enacted, that if any slave shall hereafter teach,
they shall be sentenced to receive 39 lashes on his or her bare back.
There are so many issues in the public education system. I don't think we have enough time in this documentary to cover them all.
What about you, sir? Do you think the colored students will show up?
If I got anything to do with it, they won't show up.
We're white people. We don't want them to go to school with niggas.
We did everything we could to maintain segregation by trying to provide the Negro students with good, equal, but separate facilities.
As long as the system that we are in exists, the survival of this system depends upon the continued degrading of the black man in this country,
using us as the whipping boy and the alibi and the excuse.
As long as this system exists, you will find that our people will have the same attitude towards education.
The burden rests upon the leaders of the Afro-American community to try and instill within the youth
the desire to further their education, because without it, you're not going anywhere on this earth today.
A failing school system affects our democracy from the beginning.
So I think a very important thing for us as a people to do is to recognize that this is not a democracy.
It's all about how much should you invest in your education and what you ultimately get in return for education.
You know, education is extremely important because there aren't too many people with PhDs locked up in prison. That seems to go and settle it.
It's a dynamic problem, so there's not going to be a simple solution. The solutions are going to be complex. One way is homeschooling. How important has education been in your life?
Education has been the cornerstone for my success, unequivocally.
Much of what I say I do right now is as a result of pursuing my education, having my family pressure me to continue my education, and by graduating Howard University undergrad and law school, and also getting continuing education.
I'm a first-generation college graduate, first person in my family to also receive a master's, first to also pledge in a fraternity. So being that I didn't really have anyone else in my life that graduated from college, it was extremely important so I could show future generations in my family that is highly critical to make sure that you graduate from college.
My parents always inculcated into all of us children and my entire family how important education was. And it was a very tenuous relationship with education because by the time that I came to this country, I was already in 8th grade. And so when I got to high school, they were like, what's an 11-year-old doing here?
I was born and raised in Botswana. And that is, for those that don't know, a small country of only 2 million people in Southern Africa. I had the good fortune to go to private schools because my parents were very invested in my education.
I am the daughter of 2 educators. My father, university administrator, my mother, public school art teacher. And they always made education very, very important to me. And so I pursued education ferociously in my life and made it important in my children's lives.
We made it very clear to our oldest children, as we do to our youngest child, how important education is. And the way we did that was by example. My wife and I, we put ourselves through college.
So I had a chance to experience both the parochial side of education as well as the public school side of education. And I can honestly say that it was overwhelmingly positive. And I think a part of that is because I have phenomenal teachers who were truly vested in my success, not just as a student, but as a human being.
Malcolm X talked about when he was in elementary school how he told his teacher that he wanted to be a lawyer, and the white woman responded and said, you could never be a lawyer. Your people won't support you, and our people would never hire you as a lawyer. You're better off getting a job doing something tangible with your hands, I believe she said.
My current position and role inside of the community would be a vocal activist, a person who is 110% about education, environment, enhancement, the Black community, Black empowerment, Black economics, all those things that's for the betterment of our community. My role is basically trying to get us to where we need to be, especially young women.
It has opened so many doors for me. It's given me opportunities to expand my horizon, my territory, to travel, to interface with other people, to be a blessing to other people. And I know that that wouldn't have happened if I had not pursued an education.
I have 3 different degrees, so I respect education and I respect that we can get formally educated. But I think it's also just as important to focus on using what you have and understanding that you're building a human being that's going into society. And it's not a textbook, it's life. And they can learn life from other people who've lived life longer than them.
For me, the conversation about education became very real because it wasn't just about going to class and taking exams. It was about speaking up for my own capacity, which was a great lesson to learn when you're barely 10 or 11. Actively seeking out knowledge on my own in my personal life has been very important to my growth and development.
And without my education, I cannot say that I would be in the financial position I am in today.
We've been taught that education is one of the most important things in our community. However, we're not learning how to apply the education for the betterment of our community.
I was raised predominantly by my grandmother, my grandfather, and my father. All 3 did not even have a high school diploma. My father dropped out in high school. My grandmother dropped out in 6th grade. My grandfather dropped out in the 3rd grade and was illiterate. But he had to take care of the family, as he and my grandmother had 16 children. So he was a breadwinner. So for me, education has changed the trajectory of my life.
System has become too focused on tests to the point where learning is no longer valued. And now the value that's been placed on children is how high they can score so that their teacher can get a pat on the back and the school can get a pat on the back.
Standardized test scores opposed to actually, teaching the students valuable information that will help them with their lives as well as retaining information. It's one thing to get information to take a test, to pass the test. It's another thing to actually retain information, and there's a science behind that.
From Detroit to Atlanta, the standardized testing, they want teachers to be responsible for children and standardized testing when these children don't live standardized lives.
Because sometimes we'll look at scores and we'll say, oh, that student's not capable, right? It's supposed to measure aptitude. Does it really? Especially when we recognize that oftentimes those tests are culturally biased.
Those students that are having problems K through 4, when they hit the 4th grade, take that test, fail the test, those children, many of them are now categorized as, either being deficient for whatever reasons in the classroom, and now they're being excluded sometimes from the body of classes that are moving forward.
My name is Cherie Townsend, and I am a single mother of 2 children, a 16-year-old son named Jalen, who goes to public school, and a 10-year-old daughter, London, who I homeschool. The education in my home actually is pretty structured. London is homeschooled, so she runs a pretty tight program under myself, and my 16-year-old Jalen, he does go to public school. My son, I didn't pull him out and homeschool him, though, until the 7th grade, and that didn't last very long for him. London was actually 1st grade when I started homeschooling her. My son was on the higher end of standardized testing. He tested with no problem. And London, on the other hand, she's a test taker, but I think standardized testing, sometimes confuses children, and I think it confuses her. She can have straight A's and pass all her tests with flying colors. Now, to take the standardized tests, those scores to me don't reflect her academic ability.
My SAT scores indicated that I should have flunked out of college after my 1st semester, right? So they're supposed to predict someone's success. Not only did I not flunk out, I went from a bachelor's to a master's to a PhD before I was 29 years old, from a tier 1 university.
In the Dominican Republic, the way that the school system is set up, we would take exams for all the subjects that you're taking. And if you got a 95 or above, you had the option of spending the second half of that year in the following grade.
Actually, I had a mentee that was in public school, and when I met him, he was in the 6th grade and could not multiply. This was very alarming to me because that let me know that the school system had passed him along, and I'm pretty sure that they knew he could not multiply, but since he had some behavioral issues in school, their focus was not on making sure that he was educated, more so just getting him out of their class.
It's inexcusable that a child can go through a K through 12 education system that's funded by taxpayers, and there's not a level of accountability for that child having the basic skills that will enable him or her to have a life beyond high school. I see them as being a tool or mechanism to basically disempower our children.
Education's purpose is to replace an empty mind with an open one. Malcolm Forbes.
What you're basically doing is taking kids and putting them into a camp to prepare them to go and work for somebody else in a corporation. You're teaching them that they have to just do what they're told and do whatever is best for the company or for somebody else, but not for them, not for their family, not for building wealth, and not for building legacy.
They can't teach out of the 4 boxes of what they've been given, and even inside of the boxes of what we've been given is very hard for them to achieve.
We look down on socialism, but in a socialist community, everyone is basically guaranteed the same level of healthcare, the same level of education. We can say what we want about Cuba, but Cuba has a very low illiteracy rate.
And now you have institutions that are run like businesses, where students are seen as commodities. You know, there's money that follows a child. And so I think what's happened is that you have people who are now inclined to be vested in education, not because they care about the well-being of children, but because there's a bottom line and they're able to profit off of that. And I think, unfortunately, we see it more frequently in urban epicenters than we do in other areas.
The sad thing is, a lot of our students aren't even aware of the circumstances that they're being put into. And that's why education right now is very financial related.
The Department of Education has made it very clear. The 1964 Civil Rights Act has several different mechanisms attached to it.
No person in the U.S. shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program of activity receiving federal financial assistance.
Title VI deals with any grants that are being distributed to any entity that receives federal money, our taxpayer money. Those entities have to make sure that they are no longer discriminatory.
Because of Title II and Title VI funding, they get more money for removing children out of the classroom for special ed or other needs versus leaving them in the traditional classroom, which is often why some of your children are being labeled special ed just to get them out of the classroom.
In the wealthier districts, they have better facilities, better teachers, and better programs and resources to give children an upper hand on life in regards to college preparation, as well as some trade programs that they want to pursue in life.
But those that are in marginal neighborhoods or neighborhoods that are more in need, they're mainly just maintaining and monitoring the youth as a main job. It's just trying to survive every day, you know.
The mediocre teacher tells, the good teacher explains, the superior teacher demonstrates, the great teacher inspires. William A. Ward.
So please get your mask and step out.
Heads up.
We have teachers who are afraid of their students. We have teachers who are afraid of parents. And rather than getting that child the resources that are necessary, instead of bringing in the infrastructures and the safety nets to position that child to be successful, you have individuals who pass, they say, well, it's this person's fault, this person's fault. So you have a lot of scapegoating, when in reality, we all are responsible for that. No child should graduate from high school without a fundamental understanding of the importance of literacy. No child.
Not everybody learns from a book, and not everybody learns by hearing or seeing somebody lecturing. And we have to take into account that not only do human beings learn differently, but we also demonstrate our learning differently. And if we do not honor those differences, and if we do not know how to harness those differences, then school systems will continue to fail, and we will continue to have less than excellent citizens when they become adults and productive members of society.
My son Jalen, he is 16 and he reads 12th grade, probably first year college level. In London, she is 10 years old and she reads about a 7th, 8th grade level right now. I think homeschool has affected her reading level in a positive way, because she gets to read at her own pace. When she's done with the level she's on, she's able to excel and move to the next level and continue to move forward. She's not held back at all in the homeschool system.
Is it even possible? I have to ask myself, is it possible for a student to become successful in a public school system? Because that means that students are going by the rules of a system that was not created for their betterment in mind.
Because you have some young people, because their school systems are flawed, because they don't have the same resources, That child may have a 4.0, this other child may have a 4.0, but those 4.0s aren't equal. So when it's time to apply for colleges and for scholarships, you're going to have some young people who are going to be able to matriculate and go on to a 4-year university, whereas others may have to spend a year or two at a community college. So when we think about meritocracy and we think about the idea that technically if we all work and we put in the effort, we should have equal access to the same rewards and results. But that's not the case.
I decided to homeschool my children. I realized that there's more opportunity in homeschool versus the public school. And homeschool, they're not just a number.
My name is London Davis and I'm 10 years old. What I like about homeschooling is I get to wake up at my own pace. I get to do my work. I don't have a time limit. I don't have to get up as early as most kids. They get up really early and I can do however much work I want.
Every student can learn, just not on the same day or the same way. George Evans.
My name is LaShawn Size. My husband, Harley Size, my 6-year-old daughter, Madison Size, her 3-year-old brother, Caleb Size, from Long Beach, California, and I'm a stay-at-home mother, and I also do hair at home. I work from home as well. So my children are educated at home. I homeschool both my 6-year-old and my 3-year-old child. My 6-year-old was formerly in traditional education. She did preschool, pre-K and beginning kindergarten in a regular school. For multiple reasons, we've decided to educate her at home. First being that, in my opinion, she was more advanced in the curriculum that they were teaching, and each request I made for her to be moved forward was denied. That was one of the reasons. The other reason was financial. It made more financial sense for me to educate my kids at home. I was working a full-time job as well as my husband. At the birth of our 3rd child, we did the math, we sat down, had a conversation, and it turned out that my take-home pay, after taxes, after childcare, after traveling, everything, we were bringing home, to me, wasn't worth the money to have someone educating my children full-time. So we came up with some alternatives for me to fill that gap, make up the money from home. That's where the doing hair at home thing comes in. And we decided for me to homeschool. Another factor that played a part in it was the control that they have of my children, such as the mandatory vaccinations or us not being able to move around and change our scheduling because the school districts want you to have your kids on a specific schedule. My daughter has a lot of extracurricular activities, which I feel are an important part of her education to make her a whole individual. To me, there's more than ABCs and 1, 2, 3s to educating a child. To make them spiritually whole, mentally whole, physically whole, there's a lot more in play than I feel that the school district can supply. Also, I feel that I'm more vested in them being a whole person.
My mama, my teacher, is good. I like it. She gets to spend time with me, and she can help me with some stuff.
So where are we going?
We're going to jiu-jitsu.
My name is Tate Skifstrom. I'm an instructor here at Neutral Grounds. I'm a black belt under Evaldo Lima. Madison's great. She's very energetic. When I say energetic, she has a very positive attitude. She knows when to be competitive. She knows when to take her time. She's a good listener, interacts great with the other kids, and again, she's one of our toughest students out there.
My children do not participate in any programs that are specifically for Black children. However, they are involved in several activities. Well, Jalen, he does play football and he runs track for his high school, which commands a lot of time actually. And then London, she does cheerleading, she does gymnastics, she runs track, she has acting classes and voice lessons.
You have to understand that education isn't about your kid just learning math and English. They need those things. Those are life skills that we need. But there are more important things for your kids to learn. How do they relate to other people? What kind of wife is your daughter going to be? What kind of husband is your son going to be? Are they going to be a good business partner? When they finally build that business, are they going to be an excellent leader? Those are skills that they can learn from a young age.
My children have benefited from being homeschooled because As far as I can recall, neither one of them have had African American teachers. So they're being taught their culture by someone else who was taught our culture, but who don't really know. And it's easier for me to teach them myself. That way it takes the responsibility off of someone else. Public schools are limited to Black History Month because that's what they have to do, and that's not okay. They both should learn about their history all year long. So it's very important to me.
Public school system is not designed really to teach Black people. Let's get straight to the point. We're talking formal education right now. We're talking about the subjects you can master in formal education. And the public school systems in Washington, D.C. is struggling to do that, let alone give Black people what they really need beyond a formal education, which is other types of cultural and even political education that would improve our overall condition.
Who is the president of the United States right now?
A Black man. With a white Congress, with a white Senate, with what everything else. He doesn't have the control of everything.
Go off.
A teacher inside of a classroom that does not understand some of the cultural nuances of the students that have been entrusted to that teacher, then it's very easy to paint those students with a broad brush of whatever the surface stereotype or the surface understanding may be. And a lot of times we are teaching our children where the primary agenda or the primary result is expediency and not actual education.
They are not learning in a way that is rhythmically in line, with melanated students. And I think that it is doing a disservice because it's teaching our children to grow up and get jobs and to be workers, opposed to being leaders of themselves and being self-employed.
Kids run around here and they yell and scream about everybody doing stuff to them when he has no respect.
That's your problem. You're too ignorant.
You're too young and life is too short for y'all to be selling out with that kind of nonsense.
Anything negative that the media can place on Black people, it doesn't escape educators. So we're in there with everybody else. We're not the trusted group when in fact we are the pole marks of the community.
Right, it's hard to have a role model. It's hard to look up to someone who doesn't look like you inside the educational realm. If I aspire to be a college professor, to me, even as a grown man, I'll probably say, well, I don't see nobody who look like me, so I'm not even gonna waste my time doing it, right? And then I go in all of these schools and I see a majority of white teachers or different race teachers who are not African Americans, but all of the cooks, majority of the cooks, majority of the secretaries, majorities of the janitors are what? Black.
Psychologists will tell you that the parent who is the same gender of the child is very instrumental in that child developing, fostering a strong sense of self-love and a desire to grow into manhood and be a good man. And the same thing with women.
Hi, my name is Jalen Hamler. I'm 16 years old and I'm a junior in high school. I started off in public school. I switched over to homeschooling in 7th grade. I felt like I really didn't like it. It wasn't for me. I'm more of a social person. I like to be in the classroom learning. And so after 1 year of homeschooling, I went to public school. And I've been in public school ever since. We don't talk about a lot of Black history. Of course, Martin Luther King and all that. But there's a lot of Black history that we don't learn about. And I do want to learn more. I feel like we don't get taught enough about it in school, and it needs to be taught about more.
If we teach today's students as we taught yesterday, we rob them of tomorrow. John Dewey.
Black people, black children in the public school system are continuously being ruined because they don't have any control over the curriculum.
The school system can ruin black children by failing to teach them a knowledge of self, by failing to teach them who we really are and the reality in society, and giving us a watered down version of certain key parts of that system.
The school system does not teach our children about true black history, right? We know we have Black History Month, but the same old narratives are reinforced. Rosa Parks, Dr. King, in which they are important figures and need to be celebrated. Their lives need to be celebrated, but why are we teaching our children in public schools that we started from slaves?
What is that little black child thinking? She's thinking that her origin in the world begins in slavery, and she really didn't get a break till after slavery and sometime recently in America.
See, so the messaging that it is sending our children is dangerous to be in that type of environment and not know any better.
My grandmother, my father, and my mother are more qualified than anybody I know to teach my kids our history, our culture, our tradition. So if you want me to come up with a book, I can come up with a book, sure. But I think my mother's more qualified. I think my father's more qualified to teach my son who he is, to teach my daughter who she is.
I mean, while some of the things that I see my daughter bringing home from school, I have to say that they're good, because if it's mathematics or it's science or certain kind of sciences, that's fine with me. But then I also have to see her come home with a different version of the Christopher Columbus story that I know is actually true.
You know, a lot of our people are suffering from mental illness, depression, the pressure of this society, watching videos of Eric Garner and, you know, brothers Mike Brown being killed and murdered out in the street. And our children are watching this. We don't have any sort of academia to deal with that. We barely even talk about it in our communities.
Again, young people, she sat down in that seat, though, right? Have a seat. She sat down in
A Texas high school student has been charged with attacking a public servant.
Bullied or criminal? You said black not the children, the educators, right?
Educators, black educators.
Bullied or criminalized. Ooh, I never thought about that one.
The black teachers are trying their hardest to educate a group of people in this environment, and they barely can survive themselves.
I do think that black educators are bullied in a sense due to being a black male, and this is not a figment of my imagination. Statistics show that black male educators are not seen, quote unquote, as educators. We are seen as disciplinarians.
Listen, quit selling out of my house. Anthony, shut up and sit down.
Not of all children, but when black children are doing something, then they want to come and get the black teacher. I've been in that situation.
Think about the situation where a young black teacher is villainized because she's dressed too sexy, and she's not dressed any different than anybody else. Her body is built different, so are they body shaming?
Whether it's, you know, young sisters with Afro puffs or, you know, young brothers who may not necessarily know how to vibe with, you know, teachers of other nationalities. They are being, you know, put on medication. They're, you know, spending a lot of time in detention after school, and a lot of it is for nothing. You know, not based on test scores or, you know, academic progress or lack thereof.
The problem with the implicit bias is that my belief systems aren't causing me, especially being a former law enforcement officer, to negatively impact white citizens. Whereas white citizens are taking their implicit bias and their actions are negatively impacting many, many black people. So we have to go and be cognizant of the fact that, you know, this whole thing about implicit bias being the new term to go and couch racism and discrimination, to me it seems like a bad science.
I personally believe that when you put your child in a public school, or any school really, and leave it entirely to the school to educate your kids, you're putting your kids in danger.
Our standards are so low that we don't even complain about the conditions of the schools that our children are in.
There are Black-owned and operated schools all across this country right now. A lot of them are struggling to keep their doors open. I, for the life of me, cannot understand why we have not made this a full-fledged state of emergency agenda to make sure that these schools have adequate funding.
We have to teach our young people, even if you are in a school that is under-resourced, underfunded, you still have a right to be there. You still have a right to be great. And we have to start messaging that.
The school system can fail you. It can ruin you if you are absent parent. If you ain't on your job, the school system, you rolling the dice, and you're gonna lose on culture, or you rolling the dice otherwise.
We need for our brothers to start creating programs, after school programs, or creating programs where you can go into these schools and create manhood classes to teach our sons how to actually grow into manhood, as well as developing self-esteem, developing righteous relationships with females and things like that.
I mean, we have to really, in order for our community to make a change, it's going to be economic and education, economic and education.
I worked in the inner city, and I sent my son 5 school districts away, still public school though, but because the conditions were terrible, and I refused to have him go to inner city schools, which forced the cultural diversity and the issues that brought me back to homeschool. I worked for the school district for several years, probably about 12 years actually, and I would not send my own son to the public schools that I worked in. I actually had to send him away to other districts in better neighborhoods just so he could have a better educational opportunity and more things provided to him. There's a lack of educational supplies, things that if teachers don't put out on their own, their children are not gonna get. And that's not fair. The conditions of some of the buildings or some of the bathrooms where things are consistently broken or not working or run down, it's not really a good environment for children to want to excel in. You know, I think your environment is everything, and it plays a big part in how comfortable you are when you learn.
For many children, school is the first chance that they have gotten to be in a diverse group of people who are not their family. For many students, that can be uncertain, it can feel unfamiliar, it can feel unsafe. And there are ways of relating to one another that one family has that another one doesn't, and so forth. It's the first time that we get to know our neighbors in an official setting for many children.
So basically, if you put a child in a circumstance, in a situation where he and she has to learn and they can't, and they're not learning to your standards, then you're going to discourage them from learning.
What you have is a population that has systematic dysfunction, and therefore they are hardly a political threat and hardly a threat in the democratic system, because many of the time they're just faced with trying to survive everything that's happening in the hood. I have to say that from what I have observed, that at least at the middle school to high school level, you have to have some security. I mean, that's just, you have to have some security. I'm used to that because even when I was in school back in the 9th grade, we had plenty of security officers and police officers there because it was a gang problem.
Metal detectors. How can a child walk into a school and have to walk through a metal detector and feel safe?
My first 3 years, we didn't have metal detectors. My senior year, they brought metal detectors into school. Keep in mind that a lot of other Detroit public schools already had metal detectors. And the rationale was that, well, if we have these metal detectors, we can protect you. We can prevent people from bringing in lethal weapons into the school. But it was the first time I ever felt like I was a foreigner in a space that should have been familiar.
What's a resource officer?
The person who flipped that girl in South Carolina out the chair. That's a school resource officer.
Okay. Police. How do you feel about the police inside the school?
When I was in school, the words that we used were security guard, right? Or school guard, etc. But they were not glorified police people.
School resource officers is just a fancy way of saying police officers or vigilantes, as I will call them, who are coming into the schools to police the students. This is just another method of criminalizing our young people.
And so a school resource officer, in my view, is supposed to hold the container to be safe enough for people for students to explore and to relate to one another without feeling that they are in danger or that somebody can bully them or they get into a fight, etc.
You know, are you projecting protection and security, or are you projecting fear?
There's the two things that's happening. Are you protecting me from outsiders, or are you protecting others from me? That's the question that the officers have to ask.
Do I feel as if psychologically they may have an impact on our young people, how they think about themselves, how they think about their community? Yes.
And if you know anything about the psychology of the mind, you know that fear is a deterrent from experiencing and realizing your highest self and your best self.
Kids in a learning environment such as a school are being distracted by the fact that law enforcement is about control, and they're controlling students instead of many times having a good type of interaction with students. The teachers, the administrators of schools are using the law enforcement officers to actually harass students, I believe.
If you don't have a rapport with students and you have a fear or you don't have a respect for them, then you can't really protect them, no matter who they are.
And that is one of the reasons why I feel so strongly about not putting my kids in an environment where they're the outsider or the outcast or the quote-unquote minority. I don't want that for my kids. I want them to see people like them successful. I want to see people like them who care about them. I want their teachers to be somebody who says, "How's your grandmother doing?"
Certainly what should not ever happen is that a school resource officer becomes themselves the threat to the children's safety, as we have seen in many viral videos that have gone on recently, etc.
We saw the young sister who was slung around by her hair by a resource officer and basically, you know, treated like a common thug and a common criminal. You put them in environments that make them feel like criminals anyway. They live in communities that make them feel like they're criminals, and they have access to crime at every turn. And then you turn around and expect the child to be properly educated.
I guess some of the dangers of it is that sometimes these officers and security guards go too far, you know, and therefore we have incidents that we see on television and otherwise of children being abused and becoming victims of certain kinds of security brutality.
I feel that whenever you have a situation where you have more public resource officers or police officers than you have mental health counselors, that's a strong disconnect. That's incongruent for me.
I don't have a problem with officers or resource officers being inside the school, but I have a problem if they don't understand the environment that they are the officer over.
So do I think we need order and rules and regulations, and do those officers help to create that? Yes. But to the extent that some of these high schools look like mini prisons and mini juvenile systems, absolutely not.
We think that metal detectors and resource officers, they're just a part of it. But what is that doing for them as a person? What is that really doing for what they have and the gift that they have inside? How is it helping them? Is it helping them flourish, or is it detracting from it? Resource officers and metal detectors don't add to the element of learning that we truly want our child to be in.
So after a child is discouraged from learning or he or she doesn't learn, then they start to roll into a survival mode. So it's already been proven through data that once the child doesn't have the resources that's necessary, then they start to rob, kill, and steal, and do all those, go into a life of crime to survive.
According to a UCLA study, Missouri is #1 in the country in its disparity in the way it suspends elementary kids, black kids to white kids. It suspends 3% of white kids and over 13% of black kids. We're #1 in the country for that. So then when you juxtapose that with the school to prison pipeline numbers and African American kids, I mean, it all coincides.
When we look at people who are committing crimes because they're impoverished, they lack an education, they don't have an ability to raise their incomes, and now they're moving forward, getting older in life, they find themselves in a system of a trajectory that's downward instead of upwards, and they find themselves going to jail.
The desegregation of schools and us fighting to get adequate education for our children, and the increase in prisons and black men being put in jail for the most minimal crimes, those things ran parallel. So they found ways to basically use the lack of education, which it's funny that you would punish the children for not being properly educated when it's the system's responsibility to educate the child, when monies are being allocated from state, local, and federal governments to make sure that children are being educated.
People are putting more money into the prison system than they are into the education system.
San Leandro, California, they have a juvenile detention center. They approved a $160 million grant, and they're basically adding a whole entire new wing onto the San Leandro Juvenile Hall. Now, $160 million for a juvenile detention center when all of the public schools in the surrounding area are faltering and are falling apart and are closing. You mean to tell me there's not a systematic agenda in order to keep particularly black and Latino boys and girls, to put them in the prison industrial complex, where not only is the system going to make money, but also all of these corporations, from Victoria's Secret to General Electric to many other corporations, they're making billions of dollars every year off of the miseducation of our children.
Put your hands behind your back, Kevin. You're under arrest. Put your hands behind your back. I'm going to take you to jail. Okay?
January 1st, a new law went into effect in Missouri that children receive a felony for fighting at school. Schoolyard fights are now felonies. That can send you to jail. So now all of a sudden, you play God in a sense, to where you're going to dictate whether you like this kid or not. Well, I'm not going to, we're not going to have this kid arrested, but this one over here, we can't wait to get him out. And that's what's happening. We're pushing kids out.
White people are underrepresented in prison systems. 1 in 17 white males is incarcerated, whereas 1 in 3 black men my age have been incarcerated. That's a disparity that we can't overlook. We have 2/3 of the population which is white, and we have 1/3 of the population which is minority, yet minority citizens are overrepresented for committing the same criminal act as a white person, but white people aren't being negatively stigmatized by the crime. That's wrong.
It's really unfortunate that now we have young people who are growing up getting used to being brutalized, getting used to being disrespected, and won't even stand up for their fellow students. It's like, how can you allot enough money to have police officers present in schools, but not have male mentors coming into the schools to make sure that these young brothers, who may at times cause issues in school environments, to train them in manhood, to help them to, curb their behavior and to figure out what's happening in their households and in their lives to make them so angry where they bring their problems into school. It's like we're putting a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound.
And because law enforcement has a command and control and then enforcement mechanism, it's not an equal enforcement opportunity mechanism. It's not enforcing the laws equally. If it were locking up white men the same and similarly situated as black men or Hispanic men, then we would have the same destabilization that would occur in the white communities.
I would say that as a community and as an activist community and as a political community, when you're talking about the public school system, I would say that our involvement as parents and as a community could make a difference, could make changes, and could hold that system accountable. Because parents have an obligation to engage that system and force it in the direction that we want it to go.
California, which is where I'm from, has the largest population of prisons, privately owned as well as state-funded prisons and federal prisons. They have the highest statistics, and here you have children all across the board from Los Angeles to Oakland that are being miseducated, and they have beds in those prisons that are actually waiting for them.
America is banking on you to fail. They are getting paid for you to fail. There's people there's a judge waiting on you. There's a police officer waiting on you to fail. So if you want to shock the shit out of them, you better succeed.
I'm Ariel Sky Williams. I'm 8 years old. I'm unarmed and I have nothing that will hurt you.
It's just kind of a thing we practice at our house.
You have a right to have an attorney present while you are questioned. If you can't afford to hire one, the court will appoint you one. Do you understand that? Say yes or no. You do.
Now the officer shot Brisbane twice at close range in the torso, later realizing Brisbane was only holding a pill bottle.
Rice was shot and killed by rookie Cleveland cop Timothy Lohman last November outside the Cadell Rec Center on the city's west side. His gun was actually an airsoft pistol in that he was only 12 years old.
Shots fired!
321, we have shots fired. We have one suspect down.
The second time this week, a black man is shot by a police officer.
A similar loss of yet another unarmed young black man.
We've had our own Michael Brown.
Please don't tell me my boyfriend just went like that.
You done murdered my son, man, for nothing? When he was trying to get away from you. He was trying to get away from you, man. And you kept shooting him while his back was under the truck. And you kept shooting him, man. You kept shooting him. And his back was turned to you, man.
Get back to the shack on him. Let me check on him. Get back, sir.
I just want to know, is the protocol is to shoot an unarmed man down dead in front of somebody's house anytime they feel like it.
Many times as parents, we look at our little fourth grader and we say, oh, wow, they're so cute. But there are other people that are looking at them and they're saying, they're a target. There's a system designed to send them to prison. There's a true correlation here, and we have to take it serious. If I saw these problems in the beginning, if I see that they're not learning at a pace that's bringing out the best in them, then they are being killed inside. Their gifts are being killed. Their purpose is being annihilated. We're putting them on a path to prison. And as a parent, we're also a part of that. And we have to take ownership and we have to take back our kids and to say, how can I educate you so you become confident in who you are and what you have to offer and the gifts that you have come here to give to society.
Children have the ability. It's a matter of, are we practicing? Are we giving them everything that they need to get to this next level?
If we can foster an environment that supports and encourages the love of knowledge, not just, getting up and talking and teaching. I'm talking about loving knowledge. I'm talking about seeking knowledge, being interested in ancient civilizations, being interested in African history.
You do have to cultivate in your children the mindset that they never have to ask anybody for anything because they are fully equipped to create, to be creators, and they are.
Every single time that I asked my father what a word meant, he never answered me. It got to the point where I was like, never mind, I'll go look it up, because I already knew that that's what he wanted me to do. And so I got very used to, when I had a question, I knew how to find the answer.
Some of your children are absolutely geniuses. In order for you to understand that, then you have to communicate with your child. You have to challenge your child. You have to make them, show up and show who they actually are.
Am I bringing out the brilliance in my child? Am I bringing out the best? Am I bringing out their passions, their gifts, and what's going to ultimately make them feel confident in expressing that?
But as a parent and you in the public school system, you are duty bound to supplement, augment the knowledge that your child is getting by teaching them yourselves.
Once upon a time, a queen was about to have a baby, but she became ill. A magic golden flower healed her, and a princess with golden hair was born. The king and queen launched lanterns to celebrate.
Things such as mathematics, phonics, grammar. I do use scholastic programs that are full programs that a teacher would use. But as far as education, I do use everything that in my hand. You can get an education in everything in YouTube, but I don't use those for the whole education. So for whole education, I educate around current events, her questions, or just conversations we had. So, for example, Mommy, why are rainbows that color? I will go to YouTube and I'll find a list of videos on rainbows, the colors of the rainbow, how rainbows formed. I use YouTube, I use online, I use my own knowledge. If she has a question about, say, guitars, you know what, my brother plays a guitar pretty well. Let's FaceTime your uncle. And he'll sit there and discuss, well, I know a guitar came from here, so we do use the internet for a lot. I don't per se let her on the internet just yet by herself, but I do use the internet as a huge resource for me. I'm a YouTube junkie. I educate myself on YouTube, so I do use YouTube for a lot of things. For her sign language, because I do teach them sign language as well as Spanish right now. I don't do sign language myself, so I have to go to YouTube. So I go to YouTube and they do sign language and kids songs for sign language. There's a plethora of free resources on the internet, and you literally type in such and such free and it pops right up in front of you.
If you really want to be educated, you want to be a scholar. And being a scholar means you research and teach yourself beyond textbook education.
Fortunately for me, we were so poor that there was nothing to do at home. We didn't have cable, there was nothing to eat. So I said, I might as well go to school and hang out with my friends and play sports. So that's ultimately what I done. And with that, I surrounded myself with other people, other scholars who pushed me to do well and ultimately landed me here.
You have community organizations like Males to Men in Oakland, California. I know they're doing a great job with teaching young brothers about, how to grow into manhood. You have brothers like Boyce Watkins with the Black Wealth business program that he has and teaching young children about aspiring to be business owners and to work for themselves. You have Black Girl Code in Oakland, California, which some sisters started to be able to teach young Black girls about coding and creating apps and things like that.
You'll be amazed at how many young people need to see other people of color who are doing well, because they may not see it in their household. Their only reflections, representation of Black success may be on TV. So why not be that person they aspire to be? Because exposure is key.
Young people must pursue higher education. It is the only thing that can liberate us from our ignorance. Maya Angelou.
College in my family wasn't discussed much because, of course, my grandmother didn't go to college and graduate from college, nor did my mother graduate from college. So basically, who was going to talk to me about college? My teacher talked to me about college. She asked, Chanel, what college are you going to? And that sparked a college conversation. And a college conversation sparks a different way of life if you want it, if you have it in your mind to do so. So it's always going to be on the individual student, but we can also create the environment where these numbers grow to a mass.
If we really, really are committed to education, then it behooves us to be masters of education. Education means to draw out. And so when you're drawing out that person's genius, that person's talent, that person's learning style, and you learn to harness it, yes, it sounds more complicated and it sounds like it's going to take a lot more time now than what we have. We don't have the budget, we may not have the time, teachers may not have the patience necessarily. It may not be politically expedient to spend all this time and effort to revamp our schooling system this way. But I promise you, if we spend the time now, we will spend less time sending people to prisons and dealing with drugs or domestic violence and all those other ills that ail us now, because we've gotten it when a child is coming up.
You know, we used to have coaches and we used to have mentors and we used to have people who were very hands-on and direct in helping young people to aspire to be great, to expose them to things beyond their block or beyond their neighborhood. And we've gotten away from that. You have people who live in communities, they don't even know their neighbors, let alone want their neighbors, you know, reprimanding their child or giving their child advice. We've gotten away from that.
There's so much that you can do for your kids by just building a community, and it doesn't have to be your next door neighbor. It's an online community. It is your neighbors. It's also your family. It's everything. Just everybody, all hands on deck.
So I'm an educator, whether I'm inside of a brick and mortar building, I'm online on social media, or I'm out on a street corner, or I'm in someone's home, or in front of a camera. I'm an educator at heart, so I'm gonna educate regardless.
But when we take responsibility for our own part as a parent, as a teacher, as an educator, as an administrator, as a staff member, and also the students themselves, when we begin, all of us, to stand 100% responsible for the result that we create collectively, we'll start to see those changes politically and educationally.
The whole idea of homeschooling our kids is to bring forth an idea of Black success. Success that makes them feel confident in who they are and what they have to offer. Measuring it by standards that we impose upon ourselves. Taking back our kids, taking back their confidence, and more importantly, taking back what they have to offer. That's why homeschooling is really important, and that's why it's us as parents that have to take that step.
So what do you do when the system's not working? You start to create new systems. And I think homeschooling and its various adaptations are born out of that.
Parents educating their kids is probably the best thing that can happen to their children. And it's also one of the best things that can happen to a family.
Well, my favorite subject is our story, because it teaches me about my culture, where I came from, and who I am.
I currently homeschool my kids, and I believe that that is the best way to really make sure that your kids are getting a quality education. So education is a really important part for us.
Again, bring it back. We're standing here, brothers and friends, right now. He's ready to go and go, 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 go.
Children are already being educated by their parents just by modeling their behavior and language patterns and emotional habits and so forth. So we have to be very conscious that that's something that's already happening.
Just like you, kid. Just like you, man.
The social needs for my kids were very different because I waited later to homeschool Jalen. So he had been in school from pre-K all the way to 7th grade, and to pull him out into a home environment, that was a hard adjustment for him. He needed the physical interaction and socialization amongst his peers. And so I felt like I needed to let him have that. London, on the other hand, she was in 1st grade, and she's an extrovert. You know, I can take her anywhere. She makes friends with anyone. But I also, more importantly than that, I keep her involved in team sports, in team activities, and she's consistently around other children, so there's no void or no sense of her being alone or without at any given time.
If I were to encounter a family or friend who was just bordering on the cusp of homeschooling and traditional schooling, I would approach it by the way I approach everybody who needs advice. I would have them make a list, pros, cons. List them out. And if you need to discuss it with someone who does do it, or if you don't know, there's homeschooling groups on Facebook. There's homeschooling ideas on Pinterest. But I would have the pros, cons list first, which your pros are going to outweigh your cons. And I would find a way to address every problem that's on the con list. And a lot of times the con is the financial obligation, or I'm not that smart, how am I going to homeschool my child? I would consider your resources and speak to people who are already doing it, ask how they got into it. And to me, you always go with your gut. If you're even having the question or having the desire that I think I might want to homeschool, then you probably should be homeschooling.
Aren't we all scholars in here? Yes. Let's go on to the next one.
Some people may believe that it's impossible to school black children. I don't. And I don't think it's just a function of homeschooling. Because when we think about schooling, it's not just about a physical space. You can attend a traditional public school or private school or charter school, and your parents or other adults can still supplement that education.
Believe that you are equipped and you're qualified, no matter who says what, to be the primary educator for your child. That's the first thing.
Yes, it may be a little chaotic. It's true. I don't want to deny that. It may be a little chaotic. It may be a little messy, and it may take longer to get everybody's viewpoint across, etc. But it is important that we allow ourselves a moment of chaos now so that we can have excellence later.
I try to make women understand that just the same way that nobody teaches you how to give birth, but you do it. Nobody teaches you all the things that happen for your kids, but you do it. And if you're focused and you're dedicated, man, we do an awesome job. And the same applies to education.
My relationship with my children has actually been very positive. We're a lot closer. And even though my son is not homeschooled anymore, I'm still very hands-on with his school activities as well. I pop up at the school on a given, and Homeschooling London has actually given me the freedom to do that. And then with London, we're very close because we talk about everything. And then the physical interaction, I don't miss a beat. You know, I'm there every step of the way, every milestone. You know, in school, you miss that. You know, you miss things or you don't realize how important the things that you're missing until you have the homeschool life and you get to be a part of all of that. You're a part of the struggle. It's not the teacher telling you that, oh, they did this today. It's me witnessing for myself. And I don't think there's a better feeling than that, you know?
You know, the blessing of today, it's a gift and a curse, but the internet is a major blessing as far as us finding ways to, you know, help to facilitate educating our children.
There's so many resources available for parents now. You have Khan Academy, Khan, Khan Academy online.
You can go to that website and find everything from, you know, lessons on mathematics to science to, you know, statistics, geometry, you know, as far as if you need a side tutor if your child is struggling in school.
Well, there's Coursera. You can use Udemy, and you can, of course, Google anything you need.
Duolingo, also for learning different languages. We've come to a world where it is imperative that we know more than one language.
There is the Black Business School, courtesy of Dr. Boyce Watkins. There's a wealth of knowledge there.
Also, like I said, you know, YouTube University, now you can basically go online and find out how to do anything. My son can break down, you know, can figure out how to, you know, break down a PlayStation, you know, take it apart, put it back together again. I mean, it blows my mind how fast he is with his hands and, you know, putting together things as far as technology is concerned. When I need help, you know, as far as that's concerned, I ask my son.
There is, again, so many online programs that you can find. And I also think that it's important to use what we have now. We're in the age of technology. We're in the age of social media. There's nothing wrong with just starting a co-op. A co-op would be a collection of families who are homeschooling and they share knowledge. I personally come from the business world, so I believe kids should learn how to build businesses from a young age.
But there are many resources out there that you can just, with your own innovation, your own creativity, and then resources that you can find online. You can teach your children and supplement the education that they get in school.
If you're really dedicated, you can find the resources, you can find the people, you can find anything and everything to build your child up. It just starts with your intention and your focus, your discipline, and your dedication.
In terms of schooling, my definition of success, it would be making a whole person, not just a person who's proficient in reading or math, but a whole human being, someone who's emotionally intelligent, who's intellectually intelligent, but physically healthy. I think making that person fully rounded, acknowledging all levels of advancement.
I think every African American household should have a supplemental curriculum at home. A curriculum that like lists each grade what a child should learn, and also things that is not taught within the school system that the parent can teach a child at home.
Understanding how to best pull out the confidence in your child doesn't have to be reliant so much on school curriculum. You don't have to feel so much pressure to say, how do I get them to learn in a way that best suits them? Just watch them, just see what really allows them to get excited about learning.
Another thing is when something breaks in the house, instead of punishing your child, help them to figure out how to quote unquote make it right. So you have an opportunity to teach social skills, like taking responsibility, apologizing to somebody that you've hurt or disappointed, and then taking the initiative and the responsibility to make it right.
I think that it is very important for us to find ways for learning to be fun for our children to be interesting for our children again.
I have 2 kids. One of my kids is naturally inclined to technology, and he's only 7 years old. So we have to cultivate that. We have to create an environment for him to develop his skills.
Well, my son's a tennis shoe junkie. That's his thing. He loves it. You know, how can I teach a lesson about science and about mathematics using tennis shoes?
My other child is more inclined to sing. She takes piano lessons and singing lessons. And she's going to become a phenomenal singer. It doesn't mean she has to be famous or anything like that, but she has to know that whatever is in her can be honed, and she can do it at any level that she wants.
How can we teach lessons about business using fashion? How can we teach young sisters lessons about geometry using hair? I have a lecture where I use sacred geometry and compare and contrast it to different braids that black women around the world do, where they're basically recreating different aspects of nature, whether it's flowers and things like that, using hair.
This rap music that I can't even understand one word of it, I listen to it because the kids like it. So that way I can teach the pedagogy of hip hop, the pedagogy in hip hop, and I can teach them language and metaphors and assemblies, and I can link all of that to Shakespeare, to W.E.B. Du Bois, and I can link all of it as we trace the genesis of it.
Why can't you use social media in order to teach them a lesson about life, about politics? Don't shy away from these things, because when your children get let loose, they go buck wild. You know, so I think that it's not necessarily embracing, but using pop culture as a means of teaching lessons.
Let's say that you have a repair job at home. You need to find different roofers, for example. You need to replace your roof, and you need to find out different roofers. Do you know that by having your children learning about comparing quotes and asking questions, they learn about budgets, they learn about negotiation, they learn about, you know, being thorough in their due diligence and so forth.
We need to create new textbooks based on just African history, where we can, you know, bring these cultures alive and let our children see what these people look like, so that they're not just studying Greco and Roman and European history, and then, you know, once we get to Black people, we're talking about slavery.
When you're homeschooling, you don't have to feel so much pressure to follow the books and a curriculum. You do want to make sure that whatever standards your state brings forth in terms of educating your child at that grade level, that you do follow. But it can be in any way that your child learns best.
We get taught in public schools to go get a good job and work for somebody else and keep working and keep working and keep working. Whereas my kids now, even at 7 and 10 years old, they're already in a position to be business owners. They have looked into Amazon, they've looked into eBay, they're talking about writing books, they have superhero books about Black kids. Their minds are so open.
And that typically happens when you give people enough space to think, to fail, to try things, to innovate, to wonder, to be creative, to be in inquiry.
By seeing themselves as scholars, by seeing themselves as brilliant, as seeing themselves as creators, as innovators, as thinkers.
And that happens a lot with homeschooling, where I don't see that necessarily in organized school systems.
Our young people can excel. We are resilient people. And even under the worst of circumstances, if we give them the language, if we give them the tools that they need, they will do well.
The challenges that you encounter getting there, I'm gonna tear it up, are so worth it. And your child is worth it. And if you're feeling like your child is lacking something in the public school education or whatever you're doing currently, you owe it to them to do what you have to do to give them the best.
I don't believe in making excuses because I have 1,000 excuses of why I wouldn't do this, or I feel like I wouldn't have the time to do this, but these are my children.
And you'll be surprised how smart you are, and you'll be surprised how much you learn with them. I didn't know what a rhombus was until about a couple months ago, but now I know. So the things that you don't know, we're in a current environment where there's so much stuff to fill in the gap, and your kids will not be missing anything.
Their needs come first before mine, and I think sometimes single parents put their needs in front of their children's, and it should be the other way around. You gotta change your thinking, have to change your mentality, and you have to put them first.
You owe it to them to do what you have to do to give them the best. And for me, most people, homeschooling's the best.
For me, there's no I can't. It's I have to get it done, or I have to figure out a way, or I have to make it happen. And so I do. And I'm happy, and they're happy, and I feel good.
It's doable. It's doable. It's doable. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it. I would just tell them that they can do it.
The function of education is to teach one to think incisively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character. That is the goal of true education. Martin Luther King Jr.